Hey horror fans, welcome to this special review of A Nightmare on Elm Street from 1984. And I mentioned the year because, believe it or not, it's now been 40 years since the movie originally came out, and definitely one of the most influential movies of the horror from that era, and has really over the years stood the test of time. And everyone knows Freddy Krueger and the whole gimmick of the film, the fact that he gets you in the sleep, knives for fingers, the whole thing to do with it. I mean, even if you've never seen a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, chances are you know like the bare bones about it because it is so iconic and in pop culture. And yeah, this year, because it is like 40 years since 1984, we are doing a bunch of like 1984 movies. So that's the reason we're doing this to begin with. But of course, it gives us the perfect opportunity to now do this franchise as a whole, the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, which I will say straight off, we'll get into the many different films, but like it is one of my favourite horror franchises overall, and Freddy Krueger is one of my favourite horror villains, and Robert Englund is obviously just amazing and so iconic in the role. Even born in 1984, had you?
No, I was gestating. Okay. I came out in 85.
Making me feel old, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, Rachel. I was already a spry 4-year-old, so I was, getting ready to go off into the big wide world already, all that sort of stuff. Naturally, I saw this at the cinema opening day, because of course I'm joking, don't call the police on my parents.
Yeah, everyone's like, call Child Protective Services.
The big early Wes Craven movies, it's set in like this sort of kind of suburban type town. And I mean, I'm insulting your intelligence in a way to like give you the premise, but just to give it, you have one of the original like early examples of the final girl in Nancy the Heverlager. I think Thompson is the family name.
Nancy Thompson, yeah.
Defined what that sort of character could be, and unknown actress at the time, virtually unknown. So as well as Robert Englund making a name for himself as Freddy Krueger, she made a name for herself off the back of this. And I mean, we'll get into our thoughts on the film, but she is really great in the movie. It's no real spoilers to say that. A bunch of friends who she hangs around with, including a very young pre-fame Johnny Depp, who's her boyfriend, and then there's her sort of best friend Tina and her kind of rough around the edges sort of punky boyfriend. So their sort of gimmick is he can only get them in their dream. He comes from Wes Craven's like real world and like some of his dreams, and how he like came across a character which he later modeled on Freddy Krueger in like his own life. So that's one of those cool little things which he used as like a creative spark. John Saxon, he's very memorable. He's got a lot of horror lineage because he's in obviously things like Black Christmas. Covered in the past. He's been in like an Argento film. So he does have a lot of horror appearances on his CV. What do you think of the original Nightmare on Elm Street?
Oh, I love this film.
Yeah.
This film is so good. It is so good. It's so much fun. We all know I'm not a massive fan of 80s movies, but this is definitely one that I do love. Obviously, Wes Craven, the late, great Wes Craven, one of my favorite directors, just knows what he's doing. Like you watch his films and they are so well made. He's just so good at building tension and at directing these scenes that just really get under your skin. Like he knows when to zoom, he knows when to Dutch, he knows when to go close up. Everything is so good. Like from the opening of this movie, we will talk about the ending when we get there because I do think that is the one downer, but there were issues about that. But no, this is a fantastic freaking film. First of all, the concept is terrifying. A lot of other killers, you could maybe get away from them. You could maybe outrun Jason. You could maybe outrun Michael if you never stop running. But you know what I mean? Like, there are ways you can get away from them. But as you said, everyone needs to sleep. And sometimes even if you don't mean to, you fall asleep. And there you go, he can get you. So it's a really terrifying concept. As much as we all love, you know, how the Freddy character became its own character, and we do love quippy Freddy, obviously. Welcome to Primetime, bitch is one of the best horror movie lines ever. I still love seeing the original Freddy before he became that kind of quippy Freddy, because as much as I do love a good one-liner as people are dying, you forget how menacing Freddy really was in the first movie. Like, he's very nonverbal. The few lines that he does have are more menacing lines than quippy lines. And he's often filmed in shadow, which I really love. Like, a lot of his earlier appearances before you really start to see him, he's in shadow, or you just see the hand, or you just hear the scrape, or you hear the laugh. And I think it's so effective. One interesting thing I found out is you'll notice in the movie, Freddy, his right shoulder is always dropped. And that's because the glove was so heavy that Robert Englund ended up, you know, just kind of doing that. But then they thought that actually looks really cool for the character because it makes him look a little bit off kilter, you know. So I thought that was fun.
Cool, yeah.
Yeah, and I also like that this series. Okay, so we obviously will be discussing plot points, so spoilers and stuff, guys, because I'm going to start discussing the earlier stuff. I really like that we have almost a Scream type fake out with this, because we open the movie with Tina. You know, the movie opens with Tina's nightmare, and we follow Tina, and we see Tina's house and Tina's mum. And then we get our first death, which is Tina, and all of a sudden we have a bait and switch, and Nancy becomes our protagonist. So I kind of like that little fake out that we think it's going to be Tina, but then it turns out to be Nancy. The death scenes in this are really fun. Obviously, we'll talk a bit more about them as we go on. And Nancy Thompson is a fantastic final girl. She is so good. You know, as you talked about, she ends up figuring things out as she goes along. She doesn't put up with any of the bullshit from her parents, because both her parents try to spin some crap with her, and, you know, she's just not buying it. And I love how proactive she is. She's very, very proactive in going after Freddy and making sure that he doesn't hurt her or her friends anymore. And I just think she's a really great final girl. Heather Langenkamp is so good in the role, so much fun to watch, and really carries the movie really well. I had so much fun rewatching this. A few years ago, one of the local cinemas put this on Halloween with Scream as a double bill, and my sister and I went and saw it. So it was really awesome seeing it in the cinema. I think the score is fantastic. That kind of 80s synth, you know, horror score was just really fun, and really sets the scene. And like you said, Robert Englund, so good. I think I've mentioned this anecdote before, but I find this so funny. In History of Horror, he talks about his motivation for getting into Freddy's character, and he says that he was sitting in a makeup chair, and they're like basting him with like Vaseline and putting all the really ugly makeup on him, and he's feeling like really scungy in this makeup, and he's like, and then in walks Heather Langenkamp and Johnny Depp, who might happen to be the two most beautiful people on the earth, and they're so young and so talented. And he's like, and I looked at them and I'm getting jealous of their talent and their beauty, and I was like, oh good, I can use that. So apparently that was his motivation behind the Freddy character. So I thought that was really fun. I think you mentioned in a previous previous video we did that Englund is a stage trained actor, which you can definitely see in this performance. He also has great physicality, obviously, in this role as Freddy. And he's just such a menacing presence. I also love the little Lin Shaye. I guess it wasn't really a cameo back then. It's a retroactive cameo, you know, because we all know Lin Shaye so much now from Insidious. So seeing her in this movie is a fun little Easter egg. I think she was married to the producer or something at the time. Yeah. And then I also noticed that one of the sergeants, one of the policemen, is played by Joseph Whipp, who is the sheriff in Scream. So I thought, that could be a little link between the two movies. Like maybe after Elm Street, he changed his name and moved away and became the sheriff of Woodsboro. So, I thought
given
that was
what
fun.
we know about the meta nature of Scream, that is definitely intentional. That's not just a coincidence.
No, they definitely would have cast him when they did Scream as like a shout out. So I had so much fun watching this movie. I just, everything about it is just so good. And it really was, one of those early films that definitely set the scene for what slashers would become in the 80s. And a lot of movies take a lot of inspiration from it. You can see, and there are even bad guys that are, modeled off Freddy Krueger. He's become so ubiquitous that they put him in like kids' movies and people know who he is. So I also really loved, I didn't pick up on this before, but the teenagers, they know the tune, the 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. So I always kind of like that. It kind of shows that Freddy became like an urban legend in the town, like the rhyme obviously originated from the real human and it's kind of stuck around, but he's become like this fairy tale. So these teens, they know how to sing this jump rope song, but they don't know where it came from. And it turns out it's actually like from something horrible that happened in their town. So I thought that was very cool. How did you go watching this film? Did you have fun rewatching?
Yeah, I did. I always enjoy this one. I think it is a horror classic, and sometimes when you watch stuff in the past and then you see it years later, it doesn't always hold up. But I think this is like a real classic, which does hold up. As I said, it's a great concept which they really play with, and I think one of the things about like the franchise and about the character and the whole gimmick is. And I'm not really going to get into anything about later movies because we'll cover them. But like, I think one of the reasons why this is a favourite franchise of mine when it comes to horror is because I think naturally because Freddy is like a supernatural type character, or the conceit is very like supernatural. I think because of that, you can do quite a lot with the character, but also quite a lot with the kills. And how he picks characters off, and you can sort of play with the conventions a little bit. So whereas some horror franchises you might get a really strong early film or maybe 2 or 3, and then they sort of become quite repetitive very quickly.
Yeah.
I think like this franchise does have a bit more staying power because of that, because he is like supernatural and you can do a lot of fun kills and a lot of different things. Charismatic, very scary, great look to him, like a really original look, just a great from like a special effects makeup, from just the choice of having that sort of style jumper on him. I mean, that's just a great design. And the special effects makeup, which were one of the great aspects of 80s cinema, especially when it comes to like horror and sci-fi.
Especially horror, yes.
This is a great example of classic old school scrungy practical effects. And this movie wouldn't work without those practical effects. And it just shows you how important that kind of thing is, especially in like a genre movie like this. But like, one of the examples I always use is the tongue through the telephone.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Oh.
Slimy tongue, which has that tactile feel. And it's at a point where, like, she's ringing around and she's getting really frantic. And you know something's going to happen, but you're not quite sure what. And so that tongue coming through the telephone at her is just such a great sort of jump moment. It's like, oh, okay, I expected something, but I didn't expect that. So very creative, as always, Freddy. 9 times out of 10, when it comes to this sort of thing, I think ideally it should be practical. There's always room for the odd visual effect, but I think it does take you out of the movie.
I agree.
Because, like, the way I heard someone put it is, unless you had, like, a top-of-the-drawer visual effect, like, unless you had, like, a really, like, high-end sort of big blockbuster-style budget and you could do, like, an exceptional visual effect on that tongue, it's always just never going to be the same as a really practical effect. Like, there would always be that disconnect where it wouldn't really have the same fleshy sort of tactile feel. So, yeah, the visual and the practical makeup effects and other effects are really great. I mean, I actually just love the look of the film in general. And I love, like, just the design of Freddy's boiler room. And it looks so industrial, but so like well designed. And this is an era, obviously, in cinema where like set design and things like that was still like a massive thing. You know, they were a massive part of these like sort of sci-fi or horror genre style movies. And I don't know if I say we lost that, but maybe a lot of times the really good set design you see more in maybe period type films, or you see more in higher end type things.
So much is done against green screen now and blue screen, so they just build the sets digitally. So yeah, you kind of lose that set building and that tactileness of having an actual set that the actors are interacting with.
Yeah, so that is something that stood out to me this watch, which maybe I hadn't paid enough attention to, because I just love how grimy, like Freddy type sort of boiler room is, and just all the steam and various things. It just makes it so menacing and so great to look at.
Like a maze, you know, like the girls, like both Tina and Nancy, end up in the boiler room in their dreams, and it's like a maze of like tunnels and pipes and everything, and you know, it's almost like Freddy's own little nightmare room that, you know, he can get people to run around in, and just all these places where he can hide. Because you see that when Nancy's going through the boiler room, there's so many moments where he just pops out, or he's like taunting her, or she can see him somewhere, and it's really fun. And Tina's opening dream is similar. You know, you have that feel of being trapped like a rat in a maze and someone's coming to get you, and it definitely creates that kind of claustrophobic, like, oh my god, where do I go kind of feel. And I'm with you. I like the griminess. This was something that was quite prevalent in 80s horror movies. They had a slightly dirtier look to them. Like in the late 90s and early 2000s, they started to clean them up a bit. And I think you've talked about this, how a lot of horror movies look a bit generic around that time, because they kind of all have that kind of more pristine look. Whereas in the 80s, they were a bit grittier and a bit uglier. And I think that really works for something like Freddy Krueger. You want to go to an ugly world because he's a child murderer, you know, he's not a good guy, and you really want to portray that. So, I really do like that in this film. So what did you think of the kills in this film? This time around?
There's some great kills. I mean, as we were saying, Robert Englund, so iconic. Because I think also, just going off something you were saying before with his background, is I think he's very much in almost the Boris Karloff style mold. Like he is a throwback to that sort of style of like horror villain or actor. The first kill, like you said, actually that's a good point about how they sort of fool you a little bit, because, you know, at the time the lead actress is a virtually unknown, so you've got no way of knowing that she's necessarily going to be the lead going in. So, you would maybe naturally assume that Tina might be the lead, and that scene is so well done. I mean, even though you see Freddy quite early in the movie, that first scene, it still does a really nice job of building up to him. Like, it doesn't rush the scene. It sort of gives it time to build, and, you know, great direction from Craven with that scene. And it's so great, because I think part of what the movie's playing on is like this idea of like this wholesome family dynamic and neighborhoods, and it's very honest actually about, because many of these characters do come from really fractured, broken homes. Because Tina's mum isn't like, is hardly a role model for like mum of the year or anything. So
that being said, Nancy's mum is not that much better.
No. I mean, by the end, I got the impression that she did love her daughter, but there's definitely for a while you think, not a great mum overall, but but that's the thing I love about it, is that they actually are open about that stuff in the movie. They don't depict it as like, well, this is sort of a perfect setup, and then Freddy comes in and like messes everything up. They're honest that there are like, you know, that stuff going on.
It's also a clever detail that the parents are so messed up, because we obviously do get the reveal halfway through the movie of who Freddy is and where he came from and what the parents did to him. And so you realize that these families are so fractured because of the trauma that the parents are carrying from what they had to do to protect their children. You know, obviously big. We're obviously in spoiler territory here, but you know, the revelation that Freddy was a child murderer. He was originally supposed to be a pedophile too, which they took out of the script because they went, it's a little too much. Which I actually am glad that they got rid of that, because it would have taken the film into a really, really dark place that we maybe didn't need to go to. So him just being a child murderer was was bad enough. Although they do add some little hints about him maybe being more, there's the bathtub shot, and even the tongue is a bit, at one point he's doing like some obscene gesture towards Nancy, which I'm not going to recreate on film. But yeah, so I like that aspect that we see that the parents are so messed up. Nancy's parents are divorced, her mother's an alcoholic, Tina's mum is obviously divorced and going through men like their tissues. And it's just, it's a great setup, because you just, at first you think, yeah, okay, dysfunctional families, but then you get the reveal and you're like, oh my God, no, dysfunctional families because these parents had to do this horrible thing to protect their children. I also heard, now I haven't substantiated this yet, but I read recently that there is a deleted scene somewhere, or maybe a scene that was written into a script, where it's revealed that Nancy had an older brother who died, who was killed by Freddie, and she was a baby at the time, so she doesn't know. And that's why Nancy's parents were there. But like I said, I haven't substantiated that yet. It might have just been a rumor that I read somewhere. But yeah, that's an interesting angle. But you're right, it's very cool the way it's not a picture perfect, but again, it's kind of like the facade. You assume that this is going to be picture perfect suburban, all the houses look pristine and beautiful and the kids all look shiny and new, but then there's like darkness underneath the surface, and it's been lurking there for a while.
And I think that is an appealing side to like the teen characters in the movie, because it's almost like they're put in this situation, regardless of what happens with the horror plot, where, like as we said, by the end, Nancy does have to stand up for herself, but they sort of have to fend for themselves in their everyday lives anyway, because they do come from, a little bit of a broken home, because I'm not sure if it's ever confirmed, but I got the impression that Nancy's parents were divorced, because you never see him at home, do you? Like
No, I'm pretty sure they are divorced. And he's asking the mother, like, what were you thinking doing this? Which, feels like the dynamic of divorced parents. Yeah, I think they are, at the very least, separated. They're not living together.
Yeah, so I like that. Then they already have, these are kids who already have to fend themselves in a way, and you're right, it works so perfectly, and it makes sense in a film where the big part of, the central premise is about nightmares. It makes sense, and you have this very imperfect set of characters to put some of this in context of the time where, and I mean, still today to a certain extent, but America still in the early 80s was still a very traditionally religious country.
Yes.
And that's why that opening scene for some at the time, depending on your point of view, might be a bit shocking, because like her praying for God to save her, and for that classic iconic line, I am God, or this is God. This is God. Yeah, that's it. Like, again, I think that's poking into that, where it's sort of saying, you can't pray to God to get you out of everything.
Yeah.
Sometimes you've got to literally face up to your nightmares. It's a great opening scene. It is. It leaves a real impression. It's a great opening kill.
Oh, Tina's death is... Which
brutal,
came first? This movie or Poltergeist? Because they both have ceiling scenes. So I'm trying to figure out which movie...
I think Poltergeist was 2 years before.
Okay, yeah, because it does. It reminds me a little bit of the scene in Poltergeist when the mother, is being dragged up to the ceiling. But and again, the practical effects there, because you can tell that they're really dragging that stunt woman around. It's not CGI. They're actually moving her around that set. And I always feel really sorry. I mean, I know he's a bit of a deadbeat, but her boyfriend in that scene, because he has no idea what the hell is going on.
Yeah.
All he can see is that his girlfriend is being dragged all over the room and she's spurting blood. And like he says to Heather, he's like, there was someone there, and she's like, but how did you not see them? And you feel very bad for these kids, so they have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, it's true.
And it's really, really scary. I think they really get the terror of what's happening in that scene. And, then, of course, you have Nancy having her nightmare at school, which is one of my favorite of the nightmare sequences. That creepy image of Tina and the body bag, calling to her. And, of course, the line that I love, screw your past. Everyone loves that one.
Yeah, she's so great, yeah.
Or even just the body bag being dragged away by nothing. All of these images are just so creepy. And I think they really, get that eeriness that you can sometimes feel in dreams when you know that something's not quite right and something's off, and they really nail that feeling. It's so great.
Johnny Depp Is it Glenn? Yeah, Glenn.
Glenn.
Yeah.
Glenn's a bit of a putz.
Well, we'll get into him in a
Yeah.
minute. But yeah, his death scene is another very memorable. And to be fair, it is Karma, that scene. He had that coming because he kept screwing up and eventually. And to be fair, not that it's the same as cheating, but he's got a perfectly nice girlfriend. And he's like watching Miss World, and it's like,
well, to be fair, he is a teenage boy.
well,
so
I know.
yeah.
I'm not saying I can blame him. But I'm just saying when you've got a perfectly nice, especially since at times he kept screwing up. So I think that
yeah,
makes me a bit less charitable when it.
You had one job, Glenn. One job, and you couldn't even do that.
Yeah.
When I saw this with my sister, she turned to me in the cinema and she's like, "Oh my god, this guy is such a loser." I was like, "Yeah, he really is."
To be fair, although obviously we all have to sleep, if you know you have to stay awake for a particular purpose, then you just find a way to do it, and
exactly.
And it's not like they're saying necessarily stay awake the whole night. I mean, Nancy has like a set plan, and it involves you staying awake just to watch over her and make sure nothing happens. And he keeps screwing.
If Nancy over there can stay awake for 7 days straight, which is what she's doing in the movies, Glenn, I think you can stay awake for 12 hours. Like, come on. There's even that scene where she's like, "I'm going to go into the dream. You need to be here to wake me up." And he falls. She's gone for less than an hour and he falls asleep. It's like, come on, dude. You couldn't have put on some loud music or something to keep yourself awake.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, because he was very sloppy because he was doing that thing of he kept, relaxing. He's got the headphones, and we know you tend to drift off to music.
Exactly. Yes.
Do it. So yeah, just a calamity of errors with Glenn. So, but I will say, I just remembered the scene I do like with him. Apart from his death scene, but a scene I do like is, I think the first scene he's in, that comedy scene where they're playing like the background noise.
Yeah, where he's saying that he's staying at his cousin's house and he's playing the background noise, but then it starts going into like a cop car or a motorcycle, and he's like, "Oh shit, no, Mum, someone's just driving past." That was a good one. I did like.
Yeah, I forgot about that scene. That was really funny. So you do get the occasional like funnier scene like that, which is a nice break from the horror. But
yes.
That is funny. And like all the horror scenes I think are great. There's some great set pieces. And because they're paced out nicely over the course of the film, it's that thing of they mean more when they do happen. And they sort of just nail
film
each
too.
one. Yeah, I agree. Because it's only about an hour.
Only like an hour and a half. But it goes like that.
But yeah.
Really, really good.
Yeah, I agree. It's very good. Very good pacing.
And I think, honestly, like, the big strength of the film, obviously, Freddy Krueger, great villain and everything, but the real strength of the film really does lie with Nancy. She's such a great character. And like I was saying earlier, I love how proactive she is in going after Freddy. So there is the scene where her mother takes her to the sleep clinic, and they put her into the undersleep. And that's when she comes out of the dream, she's pulled Freddy's hat out with her. And that's when she realizes she can bring him into our world, and that's when she starts to do a trap.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that she goes and gets that book that's like homemade booby traps or arming yourself against. It's like a real Home Alone type stuff, and then you see her preparing her house.
Home vibes. That's great. When
Absolutely,
she's setting all these things up.
Mm-hmm.
No, it makes you root even more for her, doesn't it? Because she's already a very likable character.
Yeah.
Which, you're worried about. You want to see her defeat Freddy ultimately. But the fact that she is really smart and learns to find ways around the rules and does set up all those traps and are really industrious, I think that makes you like her even more and root for her. So
she's fantastic. I also like the little detail that when she comes out of the sleep at the sleep clinic, part of her hair has turned white, because that is actually a real life phenomenon. People who go through extreme traumas can lose pigments in their hair, and you can actually, your hair can turn white. So I like that they gave her that streak, and I think they continue that in a later film, the white streak, because I remember in the movie The Sixth Sense, they deliberately gave Cole, the little kid, a white patch on the back of his hair because they wanted to show that the trauma of seeing all the ghosts had brought that on. And I looked it up, and it's rare, but it is a real phenomenon that can happen. They even kind of reference it in Charmed. Remember with Barbas, Prue's hair goes white when she encounters him. So yeah, it's definitely something that is linked to fear. I don't know what the condition's called, but it's a real thing. So I liked that they did that with Nancy to show that it really is traumatic what she's going through. Like, it's an intense experience, and she's undergoing change and taking on trauma because of it. And it all just builds up to that great final dream sequence where she confronts Freddy and brings him into the real world, which is just fantastic. Watching him walk into all of her traps. Although that being said, they could have gotten a better stunt double for when she sets him on fire, because that is very clearly not Robert Englund. The guy is a completely different shape. 80s, I'm guessing a lot of stunt doubles willing to set themselves on fire were probably rare, so they probably just went with the best that they got. But that was one thing where I just went, oh, this dude is suddenly a lot shorter and a lot bigger. So yeah, but that's a great final sequence, I think, with Nancy. Although the cops, as usual, are useless. You know, she's like, her dad sends the sheriff. She's screaming, and he's like, oh, maybe I should go get the sheriff. When she's literally like screaming her head off at him, he's just like, oh yeah, maybe it's time to get the sheriff. I'll just walk along and get some. Dude, come on.
Yeah, maybe we're just meant to think that he's a bit of a douche who doesn't take her very seriously. But I'm pretty sure, no one thinks you're going to be play acting that sort of thing or making that shit up. I mean, at least on the off chance she's legit, go and get her, try and do something.
Exactly. It's like, why are you taking the risk?
You don't want blood on your hands if she does get killed.
And that's the thing. It's like, it's not like this is just some random day. You're literally standing out the front of a crime scene where some kid has just died in such a horrific way that they said, bring a bucket. And you think that that's not serious. You think that that's just some sort of thing that you can just be like, oh yeah, I'll go check it out, maybe, whatever. It's like, dude, pull it together. But we are getting towards it. So was there anything you wanted to bring up before we talk about the ending? Because we got some stuff to discuss there.
Well, I think apart from the fact, then, I think John Saxon is great. He's great.
Oh, he's so good.
And I think he is a great father, even though he doesn't always believe her and is a bit... He tries. But it's sort of understandable as well. Any father whose teenage daughter starts saying that, they're going to they're not going to take it on faith, even though it's your daughter. But he comes around by the end, and I think you can see he is a good father who does care for his daughter. So. Yeah.
I do get that impression with both of Nancy's parents. Like, they obviously have issues, and her mother obviously really needs to, like, stop drinking. But you can tell that they do love their daughter, and that in their own screwed up way, they are trying to do, the best they can. But it's a big thing they're carrying. They murdered a man in a really horrific way, and that's not something you can just kind of move on from.
And I know nowadays we sometimes complain about convoluted, like, franchises and plots and, how sometimes everything has to tie in when it doesn't need to. But I think this is a good example. I think it's a nicely played twist, which is a good reveal. And it sort of makes the parents, the mother in particular, feel a bit more important to the plot.
Yes.
And I mean, obviously, at the time, you have to remember that they probably weren't expecting this to become a big franchise.
Exactly.
So
they probably just thought one movie.
Very much in terms of one movie.
The ending. All right, people. Full spoilers here. So obviously, Nancy brings Freddy into the dream world, into the real world, at least so she thinks. But then she comes to the realization that all of his power is in the mind, which makes sense. And she realizes that by turning her back on him, he has no control over her. I actually don't mind that moment. I think that moment works because I think it does make sense within the realms of dreams. Like, you have control. If you allow your fear to take over you, your fear will rule you. It's kind of a nice little message. But then we get the final scene. So Nancy turns her back on Freddy, opens the door, and walks out onto a new day. Her friends are there. Her mother's there. There's a fog in the air, but everything seems okay. Then she gets in the car with her friends. The top comes up, and all of a sudden it's Freddy's jumper. The car drives away by itself, and then the mother is pulled through the keyhole in what is the most obvious fake dummy ever. Now, I know that this was not the original ending. This was a studio forced ending because they wanted like a cliffhanger ending or something like that. So the original ending, I think, was just supposed to be Nancy walks outside and gets into the car with her friends and drives off, but there's supposed to be a fog around to kind of imply that something's still going on. But my question is, if that was the original ending, does that mean that everything that happened was a dream? Like the entire movie was one elongated dream sequence? Or does it mean that by undoing Freddy and turning her back on him, she somehow brought her friends back to life? Like, I don't quite understand what they were going for.
Well, that's the way I read it. I never read it as the whole movie's a dream.
Okay, good. Because, yeah, that would just be kind of dumb.
I wouldn't like that. I mean, I'm not saying that sort of twist can't work, but in this case, when you've been through the whole movie and you've had so many menacing horror things, and you don't want it to be that the whole thing's revealed to be a dream. So yeah, that's what I was thinking. Okay, I guess that can kind of make sense. Of course, the ending we got was kind of crap. Do you think that lessens the impact a little bit of their deaths earlier if you assume that they are alive? I mean, obviously
that they did come back.
I'm not sure, really.
I think if it was revealed to be a dream sequence, absolutely, that would lessen everything that happened. I think maybe... See, I think we get cynical sometimes and we don't always like happy endings, but I think that Nancy earned a happy ending. So I think by her taking her power back and actually saying to Freddy, I want my friends back, you're going to give me my life back. I think for this, it could have worked if that's what it was. I don't necessarily think that it lessens the deaths because I think Nancy still went through all of this and still had to earn her happy ending. So I think it's because she worked so hard to get it. It doesn't feel unearned to me. Maybe if that ending had been lazier or she just accidentally defeated Freddy, it would have felt like maybe, but do you get what I'm saying? Like it feels like she earned the right to have her friends come back. So for me, I don't think it lessens the deaths.
We do sort of care a little bit about those characters because it matters to Nancy. So
yes,
it matters to us because of that, because we like Nancy. So no, I think you're right. I think it works because of that, because she is the proactive sort of hero of the movie in a way, and so having them back, bringing her back, because she's the one who made it happen, then that's sort of like an arc for her over the movie ending is the weakest part of the movie.
Yes, I would say so.
I don't like, you didn't need it, and it definitely feels like it's a tacked on.
Yeah.
Because, as I said earlier, because of the nature of this franchise and the nature of Freddy, really, there's no reason why you can't bring him back next movie anyway.
Exactly.
It's supernatural stuff.
Yeah.
It's not like when they're writing themselves into a corner in some of these franchises where, in theory, this guy's been killed to death and he's a guy running around in a mask and, at the end of the day, he's a maniac, but he's still a human being.
Yes.
Sometimes when they get so convoluted and they're coming up with all these silly reasons why he's still alive, it's not like that. You can believe Freddy can come back because of the whole setup of the movie and the gimmick.
Absolutely.
So you actually don't need a cliffhanger ending.
No.
So
no. But we know that it wasn't Wes's original ending, so we can kind of take comfort in that. And just realize that if he had his own way and the studio hadn't interfered, we would have had a much more solid ending.
Yeah. So it's a small thing.
Just a small complaint.
It's disappointing, but overall it doesn't really dampen the movie too much. It's still a fantastic horror classic, which has stood the test of time and just influenced pop culture so much. So yeah, great movie, holds up, I think. So what are you gonna rate the original Nightmare on Elm Street?
I'm going to go with 9 out of 10. It can't get 10 because of that ending. It just can't, unfortunately.
That's fair.
But everything else about this film is so good. Like we said, Robert Englund, just an absolute legend, really brought that character to life. And like I said, I really love Freddy in this early stage. And, you know, like I said, I do love a quippy, snarky Freddy, but I do love this original incarnation where he's just freaking terrifying. So many iconic shots, you know, the claw coming up between the legs, the tongue, like you mentioned earlier, the hallway scene, Glenn's death with that geyser of blood. Jesus Christ, how much corn syrup did they use in that scene? And, you know, like we said, Nancy Thompson, fantastic final girl. The other characters are at least all fun, if some of them are a bit stupid. And the direction is just, you know, it's Wes. He just doesn't go wrong. He's so good. So yeah, the ending unfortunately does let it down a little bit, but I'm going to give it a solid 9 out of 10 because I really love this film. What about you?
Yeah, no, it's great. It's fantastic, and I agree with the 9 because it's a very inferential film. It's very ahead of its time, and like I said before, everyone knows who pretty much. I mean, there's probably a select few who don't, but like even without seeing any of these movies, you instantly know the main premise, and you instantly know about Freddy Krueger and what an iconic horror villain he is, and that remains like 40 years on. So it has clearly stood the test of time. It's got great music, like you said.
Yes.
It's probably fair what you said. I mean, probably it falls a little short of the perfect 10 because of the ending, and I think also just because very few things get a 10.
True.
Personally, as a horror fan, because horror is one of my favourite genres, this is a horror classic. So like, I'm giving it a 9, but I'm still saying it's one of my favourite horror movies, maybe one of my favourite movies in general.
Nice.
So it's a great movie, and it's always nice revisiting it. It's a nice reminder what a great film the original was, and we've got some very interesting discussions ahead with the sequels.
Oh yeah, we do.
Well, we do. There's highs and lows, but we'll get to those. But I will just say, and no spoilers for future reviews, but there is at least one other film in the franchise which might rival this as the best in the franchise, which is rare sometimes in these franchises, because normally if you have such a great classic first movie, it's very hard to live up to that. But there is an entry later on, which at least
that movie is Freddy vs. Jason.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you've given it away. Yeah, so we look forward to that in a while. We'll get to that classic further down the line. Okay, cool. Okay, thanks for listening. More 1984 movie reviews later in the year, but also because we have started this franchise, of course, we'll continue this franchise in the coming months. And at some point, pretty soon, we will probably return with the sequel, the first sequel, Nightmare on Elm Street 2. And quite an interesting discussion to be had about that movie also.
Absolutely.
In other 1984 movies. Rachel's going to be here for some of those reviews, not all of them. And I'll probably watch some on stream as well. But the plan at the moment is to do Romance in the Stone as our next movie together from 1984 because, you know, Valentine's season,
Valentine's Day.
A little bit of a romance theme. So, yeah. But thanks for listening. Let us know what you think of the original Nightmare on Elm Street in the comments below. Like and subscribe as always. Share us out. And you can support me for as little as $1 a month on patreon.com/boardnow. You can get early access to reviews such as this. You can get movie and TV commentaries and other perks in the future. So yeah, if you want to help the channel keep going and growing, then just throw a little bit of spare change at me on patreon.com/boardnow. Rachel, if you want to plug your channel.
Guys, you can follow me, Rachel McDonald, video essays on TV shows and movies. I do cover some horror stuff. And I also have my Tumblr and Twitter accounts linked in my YouTube. And Keith will usually put a link in the description. And well, we agreed today, so he will.
We did,
so come and follow me everywhere.
Yeah, it's nailed on. Okay. Thanks, guys. Keep enjoying horror movies, especially classic ones like this, and we'll be back soon. Thanks.
The kids of Elm Street don't know it yet, but something is coming to get them.
There's something out there, isn't there?
We just see cuts happen.
What did that, Lieutenant?
I don't know.
Tina! What's the coroner got to say? He's in the John puking since he saw it.
They're gonna kill me for sure.
Did you do it?
There was somebody else there.
He was locked in a room with a girl who went in alive and came out in a rubber bag.
No one knows where it came from or who it will visit next.
Nancy? There's something wrong with you. You're imagining things.
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Do you believe in the boogeyman?
No.
Whatever you do, don't fall asleep.
She's the only one who can stop it. If she fails,
I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy.
no one will survive. From Wes Craven, director of The Hills Have Eyes and Last House on the Left, a new masterpiece in fantasy terror, Nightmare on Elm Street.